A couple of thoughts on Richard Connell's short story, The Most Dangerous Game. It was published in 1924. The author would have been 31 years old. One part struck me as I was reading it. This particular line here: Rainsford had dug himself in France when a second's delay meant death. That had been a placid pastime compared to his digging now. That's the only mention in the story of France, and given that it's 1924, it's all he needs to say. This man has been in the trenches in World War I. He has clearly fought in World War I. And the rest of the paragraph is, the pit grew deeper. When it was above his shoulders, he climbed out and from some hard saplings cut stakes and sharpened them to a fine point. These stakes he planted in the bottom of the pit with the points sticking up. With flying fingers he wove a rough carpet of weeds and branches, and with it he covered the mouth of the pit. Then, wet with sweat and aching with tiredness, he crouched behind the stump of a lightning-charred tree. I posit that he is describing, up to a point, no man's land. When he mentions the lightning-charred tree, I think of the backgrounds that you see in James Whale's 1931 Frankenstein, or is it 1930? James Whale was in the trenches in World War I, and he made a number of things in that movie resemble the grounds that they were fighting over in the war. This short story, I think, is of a part with H.G. Wells' 1896 work, The Island of Dr. Moreau, and with Conrad's 1899 Heart of Darkness. Conrad knew Wells personally and would no doubt have been familiar with The Island of Dr. Moreau. If he hadn't read it by the time he wrote Heart of Darkness, he would have certainly been aware of it anyway. The thing they all have in common is a decent and yet able man thrown into a very remote and savage environment where civilized people are doing terrible things to uncivilized people. In the Island of Dr. Moreau, you have a man who is on board a ship, and somehow they won't bring him with them somewhere, and they toss him overboard, and he winds up on this island where they're experimenting on people, turning them into animals, half human, half beast. In The Most Dangerous Game, of course, the main character is a professional hunter, and he's with a friend on a yacht, and they're going to go to some place to hunt, some place they're going to land, but he falls off the boat and has to swim to an island, and on this remote island he finds this evil man who has escaped the Russian Revolution, who hunts human beings for sport. And it is very obvious that Richard Connell took a lot from The Island of Dr. Moreau. Less obvious about Heart of Darkness, of course, which is a realistic and yet nightmarish meditation on the evils of imperialism. In that story, a representative from an ivory company is sent to the Belgian Congo to take their representative away from the Congo, because the man has gone to the point of becoming sort of a demigod, lopping people's heads off and allowing for human sacrifice, etc., etc. Let alone the loss of sales of ivory, while this guy spends his time sort of becoming this phantom. The representative from England has to just get the guy out of there, and in so doing he encounters the primal evil of imperialism. And a very, very late example of all of this would probably be Lord of the Flies, which, yes, obviously it's a bunch of kids who have crash-landed in a plane where the pilot's dead and there's no adult supervision, and they become totally primitive and they commit human sacrifice. But given that that was written maybe 10 years after World War II, and I imagine Golding was in that war, it's really about what happens to soldiers when you cut them loose and they do their thing. It is, all these stories have in common high civilization reduced to savagery. And I don't know how long this little video is. It has to be under 10 minutes. So let me show you the edition. I got this from Alfred Hitchcock's Spellbinders in Suspense. Marvelous illustration on the cover by a fellow named, I believe, here we go, we're going to find it, Harold Eisen. And here you have our main character, Rainsfield, or whatever his name is, swimming to the island. There's that evil castle with Hitchcock's silhouette here. And the story itself, you have this this is Ivan, the assistant of the evil doctor, the evil Cossack. And here is the door knocker. Look at that evil little door knocker. And there's another drawing in here, I think. Yes, Zaroff is somewhat like a Kurtz figure, except of course he is simply a cartoon character, whereas Kurtz is one of the deepest characters of literature. And this took a lot, as I say, from the island of Dr. Moreau. And Lord of the Flies is on an island. Thank you.